sound.
Faisal, Brian, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great.
Everybody in the room?
Alex, can you just watch on Facebook?
Good evening, everybody. Can all of us hear me? I'm having a it's so nice to have everybody in the room. Thank you so much for everybody joining. Welcome. We appreciate the time that you are giving up to discuss something very important tonight. We welcome all our comrades that have joined online. We welcome our guest speakers. And thank you for all your time. Now, for the past few months, we've been seeing on the news, in our communities, we've been seeing and learning more about Operation Dudula and what is happening on our streets, in our communities, and so forth. Now, as Tshisimani, our task and mandate is to do political education to understand the world that we live in better. So we felt that necessary for us to, with our constituencies, with our broader supporting people that we're working out there, to interrogate what is exactly happening in our country today. Where does these things come from? Where does it stem from? Why are some people are having different interpretations of what is happening with Operation Dudula. So for us politically and as progressive organizations and movements, we need to understand what exactly is happening, what is at the roots of all, what are at the roots of all of these things, and how do we as progressive forces join forces and collectively organize forces, and that is what we're going to discuss here tonight. So without further ado, we're going to play a clip that has some explanations of what Dudula is all about, Operation Dudula is all about, and what some of the politicians have said about it. And then we're going to bring in a comrade of ours, Faisal Garba, who is at UCT as a sociologist and studies migration, and we're going to look at the issues of migrations. And then, comrades, I'm just following the process, and then we're going to open up for discussions and so forth. We also have in the room with us, we have comrades who's working with us in our organizations that are from other countries, what are their experiences. So we have them in the room, we have them on Zoom and so forth. We're going to give those comrades a platform, and then as progressive organizations online here tonight, as well as in this room, we're going to discuss what we think should happen and how should we move forward and what the lessons are of tonight. Thank you, comrades. So without further ado, just as a caution, 6 o'clock the lights. We're having Ashcom dealing with us. So we are prepared. The lights will kick in. So do not get, everything is finished now, but we've planned for it. Thank you, comrades.
South Africa is seeing another wave of anti-immigrant protests. They are mainly targeting foreigners from neighboring countries who came to South Africa without papers. The protests are driven by a new movement called Operation Dudula. Dudula means force out in the Zulu language.
Operation Dudula, which aims to clean out foreign nationals.
Operation Dudula, which is targeting illegal foreign nationals.
Operation Dudula is not any vigilante movement.
The movement's leadership says theirs is neither a political nor a xenophobic organization.
Operation Dudula, what is it about? When was it formulated and why?
Maybe that's important. Quick background for people at home. Operation Dudula is a group of concerned military veterans who partnered with the community to come together and fight social ills, economic ills, political ills, to Dudula everything that is not right in our communities in terms of the law. And at the center of most crimes, you find illegal foreigners, and that's why it seems as if the only target is illegal foreigners when it's not. However, it is the priority target.
Why is it a priority target?
Because, like I said, at the center of most of our problems in our communities, you find at the center of the problems being illegal foreigners.
We're here because there's a lot of drug peddling that's happening here, especially here in the CBD, and there's forced prostitution that's happening here. There's hijacked buildings that's been hijacked by illegal immigrants. So we're here to force our government to enforce the law, because the law is there. All the illegal immigrants need to go back home. They need to go back and fix their countries as well as we are doing here in our country.
Lagos belongs to South Africans. Not illegal. Yes. So sangcela pakani kamnandi asifuni sweet asifuni apule asithontshi thina so sicela ukuthi nihambeni ngomoya omuhle yeah sobuya futhi kusasa sizomonitora asahambe asayindawo manje sisebe sila.
We are saying that I don't care about political correctness. I don't care to be woke. I don't care about those. I don't care what labels they put on me. But what we are saying is the Patriotic Alliance. We are going to fight this thing until we're going to wake people up. They must go home. They must go home to their country.
That is the law of this country. The low-hanging fruits of any economy in South Africa belongs to South Africans. Any job that doesn't require skill belongs to South Africans.
Protesters here say they are targeting suspected criminals and drug traffickers, as well as businesses that are hiring foreigners without documents in order to pay them lower wages. But many foreigners living in South Africa are saying that operations like these are creating a climate of fear and xenophobia.
Some 4 million immigrants live in South Africa, according to government numbers. That's less than 10% of the population. But it's not known how many are here without papers. Many blame migrants for South Africa's problems of high unemployment, the soaring cost of living, and a rise in violent crime. Researcher Godfrey Mulaudzi says that's wrong.
If everybody was doing what they need to do, it could not be where we at, where we blame problems that are taking place in the country to foreign-born migrants. So this, I think, it's issues that government has dropped the ball, and I think that's why you see the rise of social movement in the country. It's a vote of no confidence towards the political structure that is in the community.
Are you against Operation Dudula?
Yes, it is an organized criminal xenophobic mob that is terrorizing and harassing many working-class poor migrants, and no matter how they can try to sanitize their language, the reality is that at the core is xenophobic, hateful mobilization.
3 weeks ago, a mob killed a Zimbabwean gardener in Johannesburg. He was beaten and burned to death by a group wanting to control his papers. At a memorial service, his family says they had forgiven those responsible for his killing, but they still want the government to take action.
As a family, we feel saddened and we're shocked by the events after he had not done anything wrong to anyone. I don't want to comment about Operation Dudula. The only thing that I will comment about is that anyone who commits a crime should be arrested and sent to prison where criminals belong.
What we are seeing, which disturbs us greatly, is this narrative that people are experiencing right now have got nothing to do with foreign nationals. They've got everything to do with policy decisions that this government has taken and failure by this government to deliver services to our people. The Department of Labor last year, when they were before Parliament, confirmed that the total population of foreign nationals living in South Africa is 4%, and that they only take up about, I think it's about 7% that exist that work in various jobs in South Africa. Now, our unemployment problem. We have 46% unemployment. So if we have 46% unemployment, which is almost half the population, how do you then blame 4% of the population for a problem that affects 46% of the population?
It is people without a conscience who have taken advantage of the lack of service delivery in this country to attack innocent, defenseless people.
And what we've been saying as NUMSA is that it is important for the working class to channel its anger in the right direction. Channel your anger to the Department of Labor, who's failing to inspect companies and ensure that they're hiring accordingly. Channel your anger towards the Department of Home Affairs that's failing to manage the borders. Channel your anger, if you're angry about crime, to the SAPS. But why are you attacking the lady who sells sweets at Bara and you think that's going to change your conditions?
We have heard a number of opinions in terms of what Mr. Lux is saying, the purpose and the aims of Operation Dudula is. We've heard from some political parties and some players, some researchers of what they perceive the issues are. So before the lights go off, we are going to hand over. So keep in mind what this comrade is saying. So just before 6 o'clock, we want to bring Comrade Faisal into the room and engage the topics, what has been mentioned, and also his input on migration in the region. So let us give him the opportunity to address us now, and then we'll open the floor. Is that okay with the comments? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Comrade Chair and other comrades. Good evening. I wish I was there with you physically. When the comrade said she wants to bring me into the room, I was tempted to jump through my screens and appear before you. But unfortunately, technology doesn't permit that as yet. No, thanks a lot for the invitation. Can you hear me? Am I audible? Mohammed, am I audible? Okay, great. Okay, so thanks a lot for the invitation. I think this is an important discussion, not least because it has important implications for the future of South Africa, but also for progressive politics. The definition of who belongs and who does not belong is central to the way in which people have been categorized in order to be exploited. So it's important that we take this discussion seriously, but also what kinds of political imperatives it raises. So I'm going to try and frame the discussion around a number of issues that, Tshisimani suggested. The first is really around the sources of xenophobic sentiments, the causes of migration in Africa, what are the social roots of xenophobia and what it means for democracy, but also in a more positive light, how can activists and progressives, try and counter this kind of outlook. Now, I want to begin by, making some distinction between xenophobia and xenophobic violence, right? Xenophobia is much broader than, the act of hitting somebody or looting somebody's shop because of where they come from or setting somebody alight because of where they come from. Xenophobia really is a particular sentiment. It's an outlook, is a way of feeling, which in a sense, discriminates or creates a set of characteristics about other people that kind of denotes fear or makes them subhuman. While xenophobic violence is acting on the basis of that kind of thinking in order to hurt people. So if we begin from that distinction, the question therefore would be, what are the sources of these sentiments, but also the mobilizations that they give rise to? I think the first thing really in the South African context is history. We have to remember that apartheid was a system of social engineering that tried to move labor into plantations and mines, but also tried to control the way in which political communities are built. And this is what I mean, that the idea of homelands were not only useful for labor recruitment to mines and plantations, but they also ensured that people's understandings of themselves were bounded, to a particular place called a Bantustan. Accordingly, people were made systematically to think of themselves as inherently different. This is really important. If you look at all the set of legislation that were passed under apartheid, the motive was to inscribe difference as a natural category, okay? Instead of seeing what people have in common, the idea is to make difference appear as a law of nature. And because of the anti-apartheid struggle, it became really illegal for people from other parts of the African continent in particular, if you were not part of, the frontline states that had this arrangement with the apartheid state for labor provision, to be in South Africa, okay? And so there's a book written by a scholar called Kwesi Pra. I think it was written in 1988, and really it was about ordering of people from other parts of the African continent in the Eastern Cape. So one has to link that to the way in which indirect rule functioned under apartheid South Africa, meaning you create a homeland and you assume that this homeland is necessarily different. All those people who live in it have something very different compared to the others, okay? So this is the first thing. The thing about social engineering and policies is that they actually shape consciousness. They reflect in what we do and what we do not do. Now, if we fast forward to the anti-apartheid struggle, in the course of that struggle, you actually had the opposite of what the state had intended. Okay, so if you think of the ICU, the very first Black trade union organized by Clement Kadalie, who was a migrant from Malawi, but also the fact that apartheid, through the recruitment of workers, in particular to mines, but also to go and work on farms, had in a sense integrated Southern Africa by recruiting workers across different countries. So it meant that in the process of struggle, workers fighting for higher wages, fighting against the various discriminations that apartheid represented, they saw that they had a lot in common. So struggle broke down this exclusivist, difference-oriented mode of rule that apartheid had instituted. And that's important because if we think of the first post-apartheid elections in 1994, Kosatu actually insisted that people must be allowed to vote without the requirement of having to prove nationality. And the argument was that, many people were disenfranchised. And if you insist on proving nationality, then a lot of people would not be allowed to vote. Now, that was a complete break from the apartheid logic of difference and territorial base of identifying people. Now, what had happened in the immediate post-apartheid period was basically an attempt to consolidate the boundaries of South Africa. If we remember, Mangosuthu Buthelezi was the Minister of Home Affairs. And in a sense, what he had done was to take on lock, stock, and barrel the apartheid policy on aliens, that was how migrants were called, and still in the same circles, and picked up elements of European migration policy, as one of the first reforms that he proposed. So policy in the immediate post-apartheid period, and if you link it to that moment of, the very horrible rise in HIV/AIDS infections, there was this linkage between migration and disease. So people from other parts of the African continent were seen as the vectors of HIV/AIDS. So policy was used in a way to cement this narrative. You see, so it's important to realize that while we see apartheid coming from below, from communities, that the narratives, the outlook, the mindset that inform apartheid often comes, from state policies and words of important segments of society. Now, linked to policy is the actions of political entrepreneurs. So you played the clip of Nhlanhla Lux. But it's important to go back into history and realize that actually he's only the recent incarnation of a very long history. Okay, you can cite a number of political leaders, in particular close to local government elections, who would make statements, along the following lines: after these elections, we are going to make sure that we reclaim the township economy, right? Completely at odds with the reality that the township economy is actually an economy of solidarity, where most of these immigrant traders, have a very convivial and exchange based relationship, which are grounded in humanity with the communities that they serve. Now, an important source of these sentiments is actually big business. So some of my colleagues are here on the webinar. We do some work in Hermanus, in George, in PE, and in East London, but also in Cape Town. So in Hermanus, for example, some of the things we are picking up is that big business allied with the local government in Hermanus, is trying to basically ensure that it maintains a captive customer base by using the state to apply laws that are meant for formal businesses on informal businesses, okay? Because during the lockdown, as some of the respondents said to us, a lot of township dwellers, could not go to town. And so they were in the townships and they were served by these informal businesses that were managed by migrants. So it meant that the customer base of big business was threatened. Okay, and so big business, using its capacity to influence state policy, tries to put all kinds of narrative around, people who do not pay taxes, people who undercut the economy, people who sell fake goods. The other thing which is really important is the scale of inequality in South African society. Now, where you have an apparent gulf, South Africa, as we know, is the most unequal society in the world in terms of income distribution. Now, it is easy to mobilize sentiments that identify somebody who is just as precarious as the source of one's problem. So if we look at this set of factors, it's really important to ground the way in which political economy, the distribution of resources, generates this sentiment. It's not that people are inherently bad and so they hate people. There are very concrete political, social, and economic processes that drive these sentiments. Now, the next thing I will talk about briefly is the causes of migration in Africa. Now, I want to emphasize something, that, you see, human beings are not like, potato or cassava, for those of you who know cassava. Human beings do not spring out of any soil. You find people in any place because they moved, right? So migration is integral to being human. It is the source of the pupilling of every society, right? So if you think of the Black groups, quote unquote, or the African groups in South Africa, I mean, one can historically trace a moment where, this group migrated from the place you call Cameroon today to Central Africa, then to Southern Africa, right? So migration is really integral to the way in which societies function. But in particular in Africa and in Southern Africa, migration has been central to the formation of states, to search for livelihood, but also as a lifestyle, that people move as a way of being human. Okay, so itinerant trade between the place you call Zimbabwe today and a very ancient kingdom called Mapungubwe, located in a space you call South Africa today, was actually important to that ancient trade in gold, in ivory, that drove a lot of transformation across Africa, but also in Asia. So migration is really central. So why do people move? Because it is integral to being human, right? That's the first thing. But we also have to foreground, again, political economy. So in the late 1970s, early 1980s, a number of African states were indebted, because they had taken loans from the IMF and the World Bank to set up industries in the immediate post-colonial period. Because why? Colonialism had systematically underdeveloped African societies. So education became a compulsory right that people required, and states had to provide them employment, healthcare, water, and other social amenities. So a number of factories were set up. Most of these factories were set up with loans procured from the World Bank and the IMF. Due to unfair terms of trade, these factories that were set up were unable to compete with those that were in the West. So most of them went into debt. Now these states went back to the IMF and the World Bank for loans. As a precondition for further loan, the IMF and the World Bank said, well, you have to do a number of things. You had to sell all these factories that you had created. You must introduce user fee into education, meaning education should not be free. You must pay for education. People must pay for water. People must pay for electricity. And you must retrench people from the public sector. So across the African continent, between 1957 to 1979, you had massive gains against diseases like cholera. Girl child education, was rapidly improving. But within 10 years, from 1979 to 1989, you had a reversal of these gains because people lost jobs. A family had to make a decision in a patriarchal society whether to send a boy or a girl to school. The boy is sent to school. So all the indicators of social development were reversed as a result of structural adjustment programs. So many people within the African continent, were forced to move in search of livelihood due to these policies. And it is important to mention that these were the same policies that in South Africa are referred to as GEAR, the same neoliberal policies that benchmarked access to resources to one's capacity to pay. Okay, so the same policies that drove people out of many African countries are the same policies that are still generating poverty and inequality in South Africa. And I'll come back to this point later. The final point I want to make is conflict. As we know, a country like the Democratic Republic of Congo is one of the richest places on earth. But since the mid-1960s, that country has been in one form of turmoil or another, precisely because of the interest of great powers, Western powers, in the resources of this country. So a number of people from DR Congo, from Somalia, from Sierra Leone, from Liberia were forced, by these processes of conflict, which I want to emphasize are very much linked to political economy, to the search for resources by dominant sections of society. So the next thing is, if we now understand, as I'm sure we did before this brief input, why people move within the African continent. The question, therefore, is what does this mobilization, which is very much evidence-free, a lot of claims that are not backed up by evidence, what does it mean for democracy in South Africa? I think a number of obvious things. The first is right-wing populist mobilizations that narrow the space for progressive politics actually are retrogressive. One, because it's, in a sense, takes attention away from the key question, which is what is produced in society, who takes the lion's share of what is produced, where do people live, and how is inequality operating on a daily basis. So these key questions that should structure every democracy in terms of democratizing the means of production, democratizing the fruits of what has been produced through labor is suspended. And now the key question is issues of belonging that is not dialectical, meaning that does not take account of how belonging shifts based on mobility, but that takes us back to some form of ideas of origin. And related to that is the fact that it divides ordinary working class people, right? Because, as progressive, the assumption is we want a working class democracy, which is really bottom up, which sees the connections between ordinary people, irrespective of where they are located, which takes material conditions seriously. Now, this kind of mobilization divides people. Unfortunately, it uses rhetoric and tools that were bequeathed to us by colonialism and apartheid. The fact that identity is not seen as a process, but as a thing, as something unchanging, is precisely what colonialism was about. Colonialism saw European societies as shifting and changing, African societies as static. African people were just tribes people, they do not change, they live in self-contained societies. And so working class people who are products of the exploitation of capitalism, who are disempowered and exploited, are now being made to think of themselves as belonging to one group or the other, instead of thinking about the central contradiction of society. And the final thing I want to make is that it entrenches vigilante violence, and in the process, completely desecrate any element of open public sphere where people are able to advocate for a cause independent of their ability to mobilize force. And I think that is really dangerous for a society like South Africa, where apartheid has systematically implanted violence as a way of solving interpersonal problems. And I will end with these 2 points quickly, which is, what are the social roots of these kinds of mobilizations, and what kinds of tactics and outlooks and activists use in overcoming them? As I said earlier on, the first really is inequality, right? South Africa is the most unequal society in the world, right? So in a sense, it's a society on the edge, right? So you just need the right set of demagogues and bigots, to stir the pot, because inequality produces a condition where people would easily mobilize for all kinds of causes, right? Not because they're inherently bad, but because the social condition locates them in conditions that makes them vulnerable to these kinds of mobilizations. And the next thing really is the racist history of South Africa means that increasingly non-white people are not just dehumanized, but the educational system systematically carves out South Africa outside of the African continent. So I used to teach a course at UCT Sociology Department, and I titled it Introduction to African Historical Sociology. And I always begin the course with a joke. I tell my students that, South Africa is actually on the African continent. It is not next to London. Unfortunately, the bulk of the intelligentsia and kind of, polite society in South Africa is oriented towards the north. And so it is very common to hear somebody, a very nice person, telling you, oh, I have a friend from Africa, or one day I'm going to visit Africa. And then you ask the question, but where are we? So it's important to realize that educational systems, not just formal educational system, but systems of socialization that were bequeathed from the past and inequality continue to drive an outlook which roots this kind of thinking. And the final thing I want to say is around what can we do as activists? What are the tools that we can use, in countering this thing? Now, I want to emphasize one thing. We are going through a really, nasty moment in terms of these mobilizations. But it's important to note it, to underline the fact that the everyday relationship between migrants and locals in South Africa is not just about xenophobia, okay? That there's a lot of sharing, there's a lot of camaraderie, okay? 3 years ago, there was an attempt, to chase some people out of a community in Johannesburg, and some elderly women came out to defend those people, okay? I mean, if you go to the CBD of Cape Town, you see migrants and local street traders trading together, at times fixing prices, And the only reason, for example, if you go to any township in Cape Town or any part of South Africa that you find any non-South African is because they have a relationship of solidarity with ordinary South Africans. So it's important to foreground that. And for me, that is the beginning point to say, what are the everyday practices that counteract xenophobia, that counteract ordering? And how do we kind of try to act as yeast in order to allow these things to come up? And finally, it means as activists combining struggle. So if we are activists trying to mobilize for access to healthcare, for jobs, for access to decent housing, for access to equitable, accessible healthcare, how do we link this with the question of migrancy? The fact that those migrants left their places of usual residence as a result of the same set of political economic factors, the same set of neoliberal decisions that ordinary South Africans are now confronting on an everyday basis. So I'm going to stop here because I think the point is about the conversation and not the input. Thank you very much. Happy to engage further. Thanks.
What we've heard now is Comrade Faisal giving us the background of where it comes from, how people on our continent have been, there's been migration before the colonists came, how people were nomads, even nomadic across sub-Saharan Africa. Then we had apartheid coming together with colonialism, telling us that we are Black people, dehumanizing Black people, and taking our land and all of this, and making us compete for resources. And what we're seeing today, for instance, post-apartheid, we still have a highly unequal society. We are the poorest in terms of what is it called? We are the poorest in terms of inequality. And we're also seeing and hearing from the clips, the low-hanging fruit should be for our working class people. So it's the little that we have there. But we've always had migration. We've always had our brothers and sisters from the continent in our mines, on our farms, and so forth. And that was the nature of migration and migratory work across the country. So, Comrade Faisal also mentioned that there are some of us who are working very nicely and coming to defense. And I remember in 2010, for instance, in the Durhams in Stoffland, Sigula Sonke, for instance, defended the women, the farm worker women went and they defended the Zimbabwean migrant workers in Stofflands, for instance. So there are relationships. And I want to bring Comrade Brian, who's working in an advice office in Limpopo. I want to bring him into the room because what people are not talking about, Comrade Brian Mozuringa is a Zimbabwean working in an advice office in Limpopo, I said. What people are not talking about in these clips is how difficult it is. We hear that people are saying these undocumented foreigners. So I want Comrade Brian, Comrade Lumumba, and other comrades in the room to bring us on time, make us understand what is so difficult. Why is it that so many people saying they don't have documentation? What is the process of documentation, getting documented, and how people have to go through those so that we understand fully what it is? Because right now, undocumented foreign nationals are being targeted. But let us understand what the process is. And Comrade Brian, I'm going to hand over to you to come into the room, and then I'm going to bring Comrade Lumumba in and other comrades to also talk about that and what is the need for support from us as progressive organizations in the country. What is the need? How can we assist in helping these things? Thank you, Comrade Brian. You're on the floor.
Thank you, Comrade Heta. Anyway, I am from the Disabled Migrants' Rights Networking Organization, which is guided by a vision, which is contributing towards constructing an environment that is human and compassionate, and that provide access to services, socio-economic empowerment, and also issues of human rights for all persons, but with a particular focus to asylum seekers, undocumented migrants, refugees, torture survivors, and migrants living with disabilities. But as we have mentioned from the paralegals, being from the networking, we also partner with like-minded institutes, individuals, community leaders, and social movements. Firstly, let me start from the issue of processes in regards to documentation. I would say the issue of the Zimbabwe exemption permits is being used as an access to divert issues of social economic which are more affecting the country at the moment, as much of such the current background was mentioned by the last speaker. I think most of you're quite aware the Zimbabwe exemption permits were created from the bilateral relations between Zimbabwean government and South Africa. And most of us, we were encouraged to surrender our asylum papers. Some of us, we have refugee status. But some of us, we refused them on political grounds because there was bad faith in negotiations. For a start, there was no clarity in regards to why the permit has to be renewed every 4 years. Why not 5? And for those who deserve to get permanent residence can be also integrated. So from the mere fact of uncertainty, some of us, our argument was based on the narrative of South African government and their revolutionary friends, Zimbabwe government. They were trying to create a perception that there's no political crisis in Zimbabwe. And to an extent, they've created a scenario which has created the perception that all of us were economical migrants, including torture survivors and political persecuted migrants. As much as refugee and migration is not limited in terms of different criteria and categories, of which I'll mention within as I unfold where we are from the documentation. So I think most of you are quite aware this permit expired. That was last December. And those who are using those permits were given a grace period of 12 months for them to migrate into other permits, of which if you could go to the options which are given, there is no space of migration. I think this is more to do with that the government within the political spectrum, there was functionalism and also vested interests, which shifted everything to that extent that the current government from the political side of it, they had nothing to do with the government agreement from the past internal processes of the same government, which is ANC-led. So as a scapegoat, I would say firstly, Dudula is quite complex, well-informed, guided by vested interests, which are more invisible hands, who are not immune to root cause of illegality, which is interlinked between Home Affairs and some key departments which are providing social services. But those departments have been long practicing systematic xenophobia, which most of you, if you're not working with migrants, will not familiarize with, which became more reflected by the refugee bill, which was amended on the 1st of January in 2020, of which most people did not familiarize with it because it's a tradition that the first is always associated with the 31st and also the aura of a new beginning. So that bill on its own, it is very, very, very Dudula itself, that bill, of which Scarabin from Cape Town were in the process to do a collective data capture before they could take it for legality because of the contradiction with the country rectifications. So unfortunately, they could not pursue because lockdown, it came in the same year in March, somewhere there. So it became very much challenging and most people were not quite familiar with the content of the bill, which criminalized documented migrants in terms of freedom of association, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, which is very much contrary to the Bill of Rights and also African Charter, which South Africa, among 28 countries in Africa, has ratified, which is quite progressive and which is more on the human and people's rights and the 1998 refugee bill. So it becomes very much contrary to that. So coming to the issue of being the ZEP used as an access point to divert internal challenges into migrants' issues. Dudula, even from some of the scripts, from the preview, which you have shown from those different clips, there is the issue which has created a mayhem because the contradiction part, they speak of illegal immigrants, but the narrative on the ground, they've created a perception that every migrant is illegal. And which is very, that narrative tone is promoting lawlessness, crime against humanity, and opportunity for thieving by opportunistic groups which are taking advantage of confusion and also the dilemma which is migrants in general are facing. Despite Zimbabwe being the face of migrants, but on the ground, it's affecting almost every migrant. Coming to the issue of documentation of migrants, which are violated almost for the last, I think, since I started practicing human rights as a human rights monitor, whilst I was working with P-Section, which is a faith-based organization under Methodist Church of Southern Africa, which was led by Bishop Ovre. There's an issue which is very, very critical, which created this narrative of illegality. Home Affairs has been working in a very, very complex manner to such an extent that they violated those who are seeking to renew asylum papers by creating a situation which is called SCRA. Once you become SCRA, it means anytime when you go to renew, you can be deported anytime. And it means any extension is just grace period. but it happens after one person gets 16 stamps, of which law within the Home Affairs, when you do your 4th stamps, that is the last, which is should be aligned with the last interview, whether you qualify to be a refugee or the government must make an informed decision, of which is very much violated. And those now who are not well informed, as much as they keep buying time by getting those stamps, the very moment they get the 16th stamp, which is already contrary to the Constitution, they are not told that once you're on SCRA, you got the right to appeal. So most of the people, technically, they become illegal migrants. And so far, all those who are well informed, who have challenged the SCRA, they were technically placed back into the system, and they are also equally protected. So it happens in this manner. That was another one area which most people became illegal. Then comes the issue of accessibility for the new arrivals to get access to the document. There is this very, very complex way of doing things at Home Affairs, which is very corrupt manner. There are some gangs who are operating in partnership with the security companies which are hired, and at the same time, Home Affairs officials and the police monitoring the areas. They tend to put a blind eye and promote corruption to such an extent that those migrants who can afford to create a parallel structure within the formal way of things supposed to formulate are the ones who get preferences. And you'd find some people, due to different challenges or circumstances beyond one's control, they are forced to live in different provinces. And one person sometimes is forced to travel back and come back to Gauteng. Sometimes they're spending the money which is not there. And those have created another group of people who are not documented. So such frustrations and also the cartels and monopolies which are happening at Home Affairs has really been part of this illegality part. And it goes to an extent that there is no measures to protect migrants with disabilities. You find them in those chaotic queues, and at the same time, once before you get accessibility, what was regarded as infrastructure renovations does not allow people using wheelchairs to maneuver inside, and those who heavily depend on crutches, they cannot shift inside. So technically, they can't go in either to renew or to apply for new assets. So it becomes that same challenges. And the few who manages to be inside, some of the services, one has to go 2 or 3 floors up and down because the building does not have elevators. They've said it's an old structure which can be improved. Hello, which can be improvised due to the old structure, because it was an old prison for political detainees during apartheid. So it becomes a huge struggle. The last issue which I would like to reflect is one of the court rulings from the a legal issue which was brought forth by lawyers for human rights and their partners for the reopening of the Crown Mines or Home Affairs
1 minute, please, Brian, to wrap up.
At Home Affairs, since 2012, they have refused to reopen it because they say they don't have resources and manpower. So that is another challenge. So they've squeezed different departments and into one. So as much as they closed the showgrounds in Pretoria, and everybody was channeled to Marabastad, where it becomes chaotic and also
Thank you so much, Brian. We have to open the floor to
Hello, can you hear me?
To add to that. So what Brian has been sharing with us, just to recap, is the challenges that they are having. Is there some feedback here? The challenges that they are having working with asylum seekers, the confusion that is being spread with the new bill, people not understanding the bill, and the awareness programs are not coming about. And then the Dudula, Operation Dudula, kind of creating the perception that all migrants are not documented migrants, and that puts people in a more vulnerable position and so forth. So at this moment, comrades, I'm sorry, I want to give you 2 to 3 minutes. Comrade Lamumba Chai, I want you to come in. He's from Cameroon. And I saw Comrade Isaiah is also here from DRC to share with us what are your experiences with in today, with documentation, what if Brian might have left out something, and what is the type of support that you would want us to and how do we move forward as vulnerable people as a whole on the continent. So Comrade Lamumba, I'm going to give you the floor first, and then Comrade Isaiah, so somewhere, then I'm going to give you the floor. Okay?
Marla. Thanks, Comrade. From my perspective, and Areta said I'm from Cameroon, but not sure we have indigenous psychology going on that Africa is not even talking about it. So my journey to South Africa came as a result of what South Africa went through in the dark days. Coming here and meeting some like-minded comrades, I felt like this was another home for me. Which when we came here, I linked with comrades here who were like initially from Kailicha, which was called CMF, which Community Networking Forum, which in terms of leadership in Kwame, Sidile was like my mentor, was like a big brother. So we had to work together in order to see how we can ameliorate the situation in communities. So being here for that time, before the actual outbreak of xenophobic attack in 2008, we had like a Cape Town tour. We like to educate people about people who are coming in from Africa, what is the situation, and then in May it break down. The attacks came to be. To add on the issue of documentation, it is really a precarious situation. Sometimes I've taken some comrades who are South Africans to go through the process to see how people who go and sleep at the Home Affairs there at foreshore, even at as early as 12 o'clock to have a space in order to be taken. It is really deplorable. Then from foreshore we're sent to Nyanga, and it was chaos. The situation that even pregnant women went there and they were pushed, so were kicked. It was really inhumane from the documentation point of view. So you go through the asylum, which you're given 3 months to 6 months, and then when you go through all the process, then you become a refugee, and then they'll give you like 2 years or 4 years. And after like 2 renewal, you are qualified to become a permanent resident. But when that stage reach is being dribbled, just as Brian said, and pushed over, you send it through, you said no, the standing committee still need to see, somebody is sick, and we have been having these difficulties in our own community, up to the extent that we also have to like contact lawyers with human rights who actually sometimes follow up some of the cases to assist. Not that the time is short, but there is an issue which we say we are foreign or an alien. I don't see an African being a foreigner in Africa. You know, this narrative of being foreign in Africa, I think I'm a foreigner when I go to America or in Europe. I'm not a foreigner in Africa. And I think the narrative that we chunk out there, it keeps on recycling itself, and we see ourselves as the next body's enemy. So we've been working with some, I have been part of the community, but in an African proverb, they do say, when you put a stick in the water, it can never become fish. But I'm part of this community that I've been here for 20 years, but I don't have a South African ID. I've gone through the legal process, everything till now. I'm still having my refugee permit that I've been renewed online last year. You still having it. So sometimes, and the system don't even know. You go to the bank sometimes, you present the A4 paper, they say, what is this? It's like, you are an alien. Where is it coming from? So if you don't make these papers, this paper was given by a Home Affairs. We did fabricate these papers. Then the FNB or any bank will have to go. Sometimes we feel that, but we've worked with progressive people, progressive organizations that have also stood with us to say that you are human comrades. So let's push this struggle together, because as comrades divided, if we are divided in struggle, if we work in isolation, we will never beat the system, which we all know that is patriarchy that has made us to be fighting against each other, fighting for the crumbs. And just as the NUMSA secretary said, the scapegoating is really too much, because the statistics speaks for itself that 46% of unemployment, and compared to the statistic we like stats to 4%, how can 4% dismantle the whole economy? So the lack of political will of our leaders are really amplifying, blowing these things out of proportion, which they target. If Dudula wants to be real, then they have to target the system that is bringing this backwardness, not people who are also struggling in the street to help themselves and help their family. Thank you.
Thank you so much. There's Comrade Isaiah, so if you could just perhaps give us input.
Thank you very much, comrade, for coming. My name is Isaiah. I'm the chairperson of the Congolese Civil Society. I'm also representing the movement for Africa Against Xenophobia in Western Cape. I'm just here to try to make you to understand the deepest reality of foreigner in South Africa. I think all of us Black people, we are just doing the continuity of the colonization, which never ends. So our conscience, we should blame ourselves for remaining silent without to raise our voice against this xenophobia system, which is supporting the colonization system. The same thing happened in the slavery system where Black was selling Black people. The same thing happening today. The xenophobia started only in a way to target Black people, where the system, where there's so much wealth or money in South Africa is not targeted. Only those poor Black people be in South Africa. And I have to remind you something also, all the xenophobia always happen a little bit before any election to happen in South Africa. I don't know if you notice that. If you go back, you find out, and that's what's happening. It means it's a political thing to give misunderstanding about so many things happening in the economy or in the claim of South African population. There's a three things which we need to make you to understand. There's a wrong target in terms of xenophobia in South Africa. Instead of targeting white people, to push them to bring all the wealth they have so that we're going to have a balance of social way of living, we are not doing that. That is what Dudula doesn't do. Dudula is supposed to target that so that it's going to be assistance of South African Black people to have something on their table. They don't do that. And the second thing is the wrong information. Foreigners are 4 to 7% in terms of population in South Africa. So the employment are 46% somehow. And you find out all the foreigners doesn't occupy more than 4% of the employment in South Africa. So how that Dudula can say they are overrunning the economy of South Africa or the space of economy, it doesn't make sense. What is that behind? It's something politically happening to push people to forget about the really thing they must target. That's why Kopanang is standing against this system, which is they give people wrong information about the foreigners. When they say foreigners are the most people are in crime. So if you look at, you find out the main foundation of crime in South Africa is not foreigner. If we find out about the drugs, there's no way drugs can come in a country without to be controlled by the local of that country. It doesn't exist in any system of the world. So what are we doing? Are we getting a wrong information to kill our own brother? I don't think that is something which is fair. The third one is the wrong political system which be in place, where the system is supposed to make you to understand they fail in a service delivery, which is supposed to make so many solutions of your family, but they target in the wrong way so that they make you to understand if we fail because of the foreigners. So that is something we must notice and try to understand. For me to wrap up, I'll make you to understand that the system of Home Affairs is made to make us illegal. Planned properly since the day they decide to do the green paper in 2016. It was planned in Parliament so that the illegality of Corona is going to be in numbers. Then they can prove that, look, we have illegal people here because the Minister of Home Affairs said, they don't want to go to the center of refugees so that they can have paper. Where people going so many times, even 4 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the morning for the center, they don't deliver any paper. So it's the system make us to be illegal so that they can present to you, look, those people are illegal. Then you're going to believe they are illegal, they must go back in their country. Where we are not willing in the foreign country to be illegal. We are willing to get paper, but they refuse, they reject our way of claiming or crying or asking nicely. So now we are illegal. Now there's a system of newcomers. In the system of newcomers, now they say people must choose where they must have the appointment of Home Affairs. But people who are in Western Cape or in Cape Town, they say you must choose to have an appointment in Messina for you to get a paper. Do you understand that? So this is something implemented long ago so that we can pay the price of the political failure of South Africa. So we make you to understand we are just innocent in everything they are accusing us. So if you don't get that, you don't share it to the next, to the next, to the next, it's going to be a chaos in Africa so that the conflict is going to create and to generate in so many times. Thank you very much for listening. We wanted to make you to understand. Thank
you. So I'm going to open the floor now for comrades to have a question and answer session or a debating session. So, yes. So we're going to open the floor. If comrades feel that they want to share or ask a question from the comrades and so forth, this is your space now. And I'm going to be very biased. I'm going to let our women comrades' voices coming through also, right? Yes. Oh, sorry, I'm going to give Joe. I wanted to give Joe.
Thank you so much. Just a comment, but I want to get a kind of awareness when we have such a discussion talking about xenophobic attack or Operation Dudula. It's very important, but I think it should be a continuous education that have to be done to our community. Why? Because any xenophobic attack creates two types of victims. There are those who can see and those who are affected directly, injured or killed, but also silent victims that we can see. And those who live for long with all the trauma. For instance, Someone can be living very comfortably in Delft or Mitchell's Plain or Kailicha, where what he earns much maybe is living expense. And when there's a kind of attack, you'll be forced to move from where you were comfortable to move from for instance, to Rondebosch to Clermont, and where you can't fit means you earn maybe 2,000 rand, and then you must buy a room for 4,000 rand. Okay, every month you have to get money from a friend or from someone who can also charge interest on, just to cover your normal expenses. So you live with for 10 years and thinking that, oh, it's going to work every day, means it's getting money, stealing our job, but you're killing yourself. And there's any way for such a person to feel free. And remember that people who come here, no one leaves his homeland, let's say so, just for pleasure. No. There's always something that brought him here. And for some people, it's really a very painful part of history. It's painful to live far from family. People are here for 20 years, 11 years. They can't even go and see other relatives. And at the same time, your relative become people you're living with, people you work with. So when there are xenophobic attacks, that remind you that you don't belong to here, to this place, and at the same time, you try to find a way to live a new life. So please, I think it's a kind of education that we have been given, a kind of discussion that we need every time to see which kind of society we want to be. Because I think the first panelist said we all part of the issue of migration. We all came from somewhere. Different reason move us from where we were to here, but there's a kind of a configuration of society that is done every time. Let's work for integration instead of forcing people to be divided for different reasons. That's the comment.
Thank you so much for that. They all come from somewhere. Our people, our brothers and sisters are here. They're being put in vulnerable positions and being exploited. And there's a thing of divide and rule taking our aim and our eyes up. I saw other hands. Okay, so we're gonna go. Oh, wonderful. Okay, so it's 1, 2, as well there, 2, Salamat 3, 4 there, and 5 Loazi. Okay. Sorry, before we start, Alex, there is a comment on social media you want to.
Yeah, I just because this is from Toko Madonka, and she makes an important point. It is important to note that many South Africans are not documented and are therefore locked out of the system. We need to collectively consider what it means to be documented and when and where and what time and by who documentation takes place. Fires can render children undocumented. Corrupt officials can render people undocumented. So can traditional leaders. And so there's a notion of being a citizen, you have to be documented, needs to be also unpacked in terms of the wider system.
Wonderful. And we have those experiences in our.
Absolutely.
Comrade.
Africa Moja. Africa Uhuru, comrades. One Africa, one freedom, comrades. First, I want to concur, comrades, that thinking about this only on the side of documentation leads us, down the narrow path, of categorizing and distinguishing amongst people. I think we need to look also at, the root cause of this, comrades, that the nation state, it excludes, comrades. It makes of us Africans without Pan-Africanism, especially with a rich history of South Africa of exiled comrades having been assisted of comrades outside, but yet our nationalism, it's not liberating, but it's more, it breeds entitlement. And that entitlement, I want to be blunt to say, comrades, the Dom Pass, we must never forget it. It was almost like the equivalent of a passport and not an ID, whereby if they found you without a Dom Pass, you are deported. It's not like you are documented if you have a Dom Pass. So we are now recreating this and doing it to ourselves. But I want to finish off, comrades, also by just challenging the concept of ownership, comrades. To think about when does a settler become a native? Because at some point, we all settled somewhere. Even America, Comrade Lumumba, is a place of human beings, and we are humans. Even in America, I shouldn't be a foreigner. This is a place where human beings are staying. Mandra.
Party Operation Dudula Party. Party, the EC leadership party. Forward to working class power, forward. So, comrades, firstly, I would like to thank Tshisimani for this event. I think, if I'm right, it's the first in the Western Cape after this, the recent xenophobic attacks. So this is a very important event, and thank you, Comrade Henrietta and Tshisimani, for this, because I hope that from this forum, at least something can be done practically on the ground, where we are able to unite and to defend our comrades of Africa. I work for a trade union, and I'm working with many foreign, wrong word, I always correct myself in the meetings, migrant workers from Southern Africa. And I keep on reminding them how dependent the economies of Southern Africa is on the South African economy. And this is historical. This is the apartheid economy. They signed a customs agreement, an economic agreement that was in favor of the apartheid state. As a result, you will see countries like Lesotho, Swaziland, Botswana, and all those countries were downscaled economically. And you'll find today, even today, imports, Zimbabwe, 70% of the imports from South Africa, the same with Mozambique and so on. So we have a responsibility as South African comrades, given our own history that we fought, that we have to make sure that we assist our community instead of oppressing them. And this is why this is so important for us to come together to talk about that. So I want to highlight two issues. The one is the role of the employers in South Africa, because I work with the employers every day. Yesterday, they sent out a notice. They say, we want to see all your documents now. They're already employed. These workers are employed by the employer. Now they want to see the documentation from. So he said, no, you can't. It's too late now. Whether the person has documents or not documents, this person is employed. If you dismiss the person, it will be an unfair dismissal. So that's it. Secondly, we spoke to the comrades. Most of them are from Malawi. It cost them about 20,000 rands just to go from Cape Town to Malawi, get your visas and the papers would come back and so on. Who has that money? They don't have that kind of money. So we said to the employer, if you want the papers, fine, give the 20,000 rands, and then they can go and make sure that they get the papers up, just, and so on. I'm just saying that all of the employers is very, very xenophobic as well. And often when we talk about these things, we don't highlight the employers. Recently, there was a very clear analysis that how xenophobia attacks has been intensified. South African First has been identified as one of the major organizations in that analysis. South African First was almost a ready-made organization that just fell off the air. And the next job was to spread xenophobic messages on Twitter and all of that. And they are linked to the, what is it, the RED? Is it RED? Radical Economic Transfer Group, whatever you call it. They are linked to that. And this is the points that many of the comrades made earlier, that this is a political crisis and it's a vacuum that the politicians have identified it's a problem, and they're using that, to cover themselves from the problem and shift the blame, to people on the African continent. And that is the problem that we are facing. And then we know there's people like Grayton McKenzie, his party openly supporting it. We know that many of the ministers, ANC ministers, are xenophobic. They have said it several times. So it means that we need to find a way to target our energies on those people that causes this xenophobia. We know it's an economic crisis, but the crisis is worldwide. It's a crisis of capitalism. It's not a crisis that we created. And that's why it's important for us to stand together with our comrades to defend ourselves against the system. Thank you.
I'm Salama Abrams, from Political Development Forum Africa. Bothiel, we can say we've got a partnership with our foreign nationals in Bothiel. We've got 150 spaza shops where they are the owners, and that same spaza shops are giving rent to our residents staying out in Bothiel, and the rent don't come cheap. The rent is 3,500 to 4,000 rand per month. So one family in Bothiel is sustained by so times that with the 150. Then talking about, latching onto my comrade sitting over there, about the illegal South Africans. They're focusing on the foreign nationals, but we've got illegal South Africans staying in various areas, but we're talking about Bothiel specifically, where we as BDF, we've documented our people, and we've got, if we could give numbers here today, they are not documented. So who is the illegals here? So at the end of the day, we are fighting, we want to do Dudula, but we are not supporting Dudula.
I think I'll be politically incorrect. And our conscience cannot follow the kind of status quo, rather the patronizing discourse that is being implemented here. One, I'm critical of the speakers. Who gets to shape the narrative regarding Operation Dudula? The first speaker came from a very staunch academic perspective, who has given us a very nice orientated history, which is quite, I mean, we can't be ahistorical. In simple terms, we have to acknowledge the manner in which history shapes the contemporary. So before contributing towards the conversation, I'll start with the first speaker. Operating under the assumption that the first speaker is an academic, once again, they are giving a very, it's not a distorted, no, but rather it's an analysis that is distant from the reality. How much would I have loved for that particular speaker to say that I was working in Khayelitsha and I observed a Nigerian who is selling drugs to a 16-year-old. And I'm saying this because I come from a space whereby we've got an entire, in part, there's a small location called Mbekweni. In Mbekweni, there's a small place called Comitaris. And we can go there now. We find that the entire community is captured. And I use the concept for a national. It's problematic, but once again, terms that have been coined by the settler, use those terms to shape the narrative. So I'm just being critical of the first speaker. One. The second speaker really delves into the idea of policy. And I understand that there's institutional failure. We can't run away from the fact that the post-apartheid state is collapsing, it's dilapidating. And our issues that we're facing in our communities are by and large caused by the kind of state that we inherited in the post-apartheid. Let us be conscious of the fact that South Africa, we never created a state, but rather it was an extension of what it means for a white person to determine how blacks should live and operate in the post-colonial. Now we've got townships, a stronghold, as a matter of fact, black reservoirs of black strong labor force, people who come into the city on a daily basis, who work for white-owned companies, and then they'll go back. So the question of migration, it's not a foreign concept, it's an ongoing thing. Black people themselves in the country are foreign nationals within the city. We come in the morning, we leave in the afternoon. Then the city becomes a space for white people to occupy the space to be active citizens. So the second speaker was really speaking to the question of policy. And now I'm just rectifying them, placing them with my own thoughts. I would like to speak on the issue of nature. I think it's quite important that we understand nature. And I'll try to do away with the philosophical analysis of Operation Dudula. And I'll try to do away with a social scientist as trained within the social science fraternity. But rather, I'll speak to the concrete reality. History has shown us that if there's overpopulation, human beings are bound to react. I'm not justifying Operation Dudula, but I'm saying that let us understand how nature operates. Historically, if you're Xhosa, you go to, let's say, KwaZulu-Natal, right? There'll be an immediate reaction to that. So I'm saying that let's understand how nature operates. Which is the fourth account, all the speakers that have spoken are not South Africans. And I stand to be corrected.
Or no, they're not?
They are not. How much would have been there to have a South African who has a first-hand experience of what it means to be a South African living in a state that is actively occupied by those that the system has categorized? Because let's understand that even their categorization itself, it's a white person that has determined that you are black, you are colored, you are white, you are Zimbabwean, you are Nigerian. So what I'm saying that who gets to speak about this space? First speaker, divorced from the reality. The question of nature and how, and you can't speak as if there's no division between blacks, colors, and white people in Cape Town. But I'm not going there.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think the way, in the manner, and I'm not defending the manner in which we are setting the program up, is to bring that historical context with the first speaker in, to bring into the house with the clips what it is that various politicians are saying about and what Operation Dudula is about, and then secondly to give our comrades that we are working with, including the first speaker, our comrades that we are working with, that we are in the trenches of, to give them the floor first to start. And as you can see, these are comrades in the trenches, in our working class structures, not comrades somewhere tucked away at the university or in the suburbs, but comrades in our working class areas, and we are getting there by comrades. So, Yiba Puti, we are getting there, we are telling our people, what must we be doing? This is the narrative. Let us analyze what is going on as a people and do the necessary thing. We are not being dangled and told and directives being thrown here. And we are very critical in terms of who we engage in and how we engage. And I think from my part, I speak for Tshisimani, we give our people must take the forefront. We are not leaders here that speak on behalf of people. People and organizations, community and social movements must speak for themselves. And we are all comrades across our continent that we are working with. I just wanted to put that out there. Thank you for gratitude. Okay. Luazi was the last person, and then we'll take the next round. So I'll take Lego and the comrade at the back. And where are the women? There's more men now. Sure.
No, mine is not a question. It's a comment. My name is Baz. I'm a member of one of the fastest growing organizations in the country, which is Economic Freedom Fighters. And comrades, I know that I've never went to a police academy, or I've never been trained as a law enforcement, officer. But there is one thing I know is that when a police officer arrests a person, a police officer arrests a criminal. A police officer does not arrest a person based on nationality. And a police officer does not arrest a person based on ethnicity, right? So I think it is safe to say that this so-called Dudula appreciation of history, as much as history is a contested terrain, right? But they don't have like a sense of appreciation of history. I just wanted to add on what my brother has said. And this is a bad thing about scholars, because scholars, they are unable to link between knowledge and mobilization, right? Sometimes scholars who don't have like an activism background, and being intellectual grounded, that does not give like a real meaning to the working class, It's not enough. Being intellectual grounded, it's not enough in order to give like a real meaning to the working class. And I agree with you, my brother. Sure, comrades.
Thank you. We're going to take it different because I also want to ask other questions in terms of what is it that we need to do and respond to and how. But go first, I'll take 3 and then you'll go.
I will stand.
Yes, I will sit, comrades, because I have difficulty standing. I think the biggest challenge that we face as activists is to fall into the trap of bourgeois politics. It's very nice to label and to pass attachment to each other, but let us come back to struggle. Many of us here struggle in the trenches, not in academia. We are all scholars. We are scholars of life. We are the makers of history. We must determine our own destiny. Brother with brother, sister by side of brother. When we engage with the question of identity, we cannot dabble in bourgeois politics about identity. The borders that exist, how were they created, by who were they created, for who were they created? And we too, as activists, create our own borders. We create our own barriers. So it's time that we revisit how we struggle. Comrade Agalas speaks about the bosses and how they entrench a particular narrative. So when do we in the working class organizations begin to challenge within ourselves and denounce the kind of narrative that is being perpetuated by these formations, which I will regard as right-wing formations speaking in black languages, black in the context. We are all black in Africa. Why is it that Tunisians want to see themselves different to Congolese people? It's because of the very nature of the narrative that is being perpetuated. How we also struggle. It's also being perpetuated by academia. You're wanting to say, I am a doctor from Tunisia. I'm a doctor from Azania. I'm not a doctor of Africa. Why not? Do any European says he is not a doctor of Europe? And so how we build struggle, how we give interpretation to the nature of our struggle is equally important. So I want to put the challenge to every one of us here. How do we denounce these right-wing attacks against working class organization? And how do we promote working class organization in the context of working class movements? Thank you.
Thank you very much. My name is Samuel. I'm from Nigeria, and I will just speak to the question that the moderator asked the first time, because I wouldn't like to make any complaints. And I want to believe that even South Africa have their own peculiar issue that needs to be solved. But at the same time, what I understand by the question is that why is it taking time for foreigners to make up with their papers? And from experience, I've been in this country for 4 years now. I've only tried once, and the process pissed me off for me not to even continue further in pursuing the paper, because I see that there isn't integration from the government, from someone that is coming with a background, with different orientation, and you are just letting them into the country. You are not integrating them to let them know, to change their orientation about the system and about the community. So, and when they get into the system, everybody is looking for survival. So whatever comes their way is what they will do. And it keeps increasing the number of violence and problems that will be falling us as Africans. So I think government needs to do something about integration, to integrate new foreigners that are even going to come in the nearest future into this country. So, and I want to believe, I don't want to castigate anybody, whether the colonial masters or be whoever has started the struggle of migration. But what I want to say is that there is need for history research, because I believe that from problems. So I'm not yet to say who started the problem or who didn't start the problem, but the suggestion I can make is government needs to do something about integration of new migrants that will probably wants to come into the country in the nearest future. So.
Thank you so much for that. There wasn't somebody else of the okay. Well, so there was that comment. I want to move over to what Comrade Lumumba, the first Comrade Faisal, and Comrade Adalas said. Right, so I kind of want to move our discussion in terms of, so what is open cooperation? We're talking about undocumented foreigners, we're talking about taking our jobs, we're talking about criminality and drugs being sold, and people being sold to sex trade, all of those things. So I want to kind of move into how do we take on and view as social movements. And so if, for instance, I take such a Ghoul House, for instance, which I know that there are our brothers and sisters living there also, where law enforcement and sex are coming up, you know, and if that should be the case, so how do we as social movements and organizations organize around these things? Because as Nawazi have said, for instance, crime is being committed by criminals regardless of the nationality. Okay, so I kind of want to move into that direction if it's okay with comments. Or do you comments so strong with want to come in? Cool. Powerful.
I'm a foreign national myself as well. However, I think I've wanted some time to listen, especially to Operation Dudula interviews and just how they're going about their arguments and discourse about what it is that they would like to see happen. I do think there's a lot happening that we're all trying to pin into one banner, if I can say. So I think we're addressing issues of poverty, greed, and political collapsing, as my brother had said there, into the issue being foreign nationals. I do believe that there needs to be some sort of control though, because if we just let things happen and a system built on corruption, which is what a lot of the brothers have shared, which I'm also very much aware of, that there's a lot of foreign nationals coming in illegally, but not because they're doing it on their own. There are individuals within the system, a corrupt system, that are allowing it to happen. So I think there needs to be, like Operation Dudula or movements such as Operation Dudula need to address that as well. Need to address the corruption and the issues around bad governance that are actually causing this turmoil, right? And not pin or pinpoint that foreigners are the problem, because that is not the problem. And I think that's where the energies need to be directed to.
Thank you very much.
Those who don't know me, I am Malaki from see, I have a problem that the biggest problem when it comes to Operation Dudula. Like, I have a question to ask, by the way. So, we have very serious issues in this country, which is say service delivery. So let us not run out on everything. I'm from Khayelitsha, we've experienced like the real issues, like when the weather is like this. People there, even where they are right now, they don't know what to do because of the water inside the house. So my question is why they don't Dudula, like go to the departments, government departments, try there and Dudula them, forcing them to do what to do service delivery. Why don't we go there? Like, and by the way, you see, with my own understanding, I believe that no one can run away from their own like place of birth, like where they are born, just to come South Africa for fun. We only have one enemy in Africa. We all know who the enemy is. Each and everyone in Africa, every country in Africa, we're all facing one enemy. You know, it's white people. That's the enemy that we have. So why don't we, like, why didn't they go to Dudula in government? Try then to Dudula them to bring service liberty in our country. There was no borders in Africa. Borders was created by imperialism. We all know that. My booyah, Africa, my booyah.
I think one thing we should point out is that these xenophobic mobilizations are not new in this country. We have had these mobilizations coming in waves. We had one of the biggest in 2008 where over 60 people were killed, and that they keep on coming up. And we need to understand what is coming up with this wave. You know, in the past waves, you would have a mob that goes around and terrorizes foreign nationals. But now you have a different kind of animal, because you have people who have organized themselves, who are now an organization, who have a chairperson, who have a secretary, who are now legitimizing, you know, anti-immigrant sentiments. And we're going the USA route, where it's going to be nice to be xenophobic publicly, like Trump. We'll be going to that sense where we want to build walls and make South Africa great again. And I think it's important for us to see why is this moment and this wave such important and such difficult, because it presents a different mobilization, a mobilization that is organized, a mobilization that legitimizes these things. Because when another death comes, it will be easy for us to say, yeah, no, it's fine, it happens, because it has been legitimized in our community, in our working class communities, and that feeling for the dead and the attack on immigrants won't be as bad as before. So I think as activists, we don't want to just be polarized and say, we're just here because we're against Dudula. But we must understand the social conditions that come with Dudula. 2008 happened after the global recession. Now we're coming from COVID crisis, where a lot of people have lost their jobs. A lot of conditions, a lot of loss of incomes has happened. And Dudula rises again, and rises in an organized form. They launched in Cape Town, they launched in the Northwest, they're launching in Limpopo. They're not saying, yeah, comrades, we want to be politically correct. They're saying we're organizing society for what we believe and what society to organize. So in an unorganized form, we won't be able to counteract it. We won't be able to. There's just going to be mass-based. They will be everywhere in the country. They'll probably run even before. Yeah, now they'll say, we're social movements, we care about undocumented, we care about... They will run in 2024. They will justify, they will pass laws. And we've seen it happening. In India, they pass now against Muslims. So we must be serious in terms of saying, this is a mobilization, it's organized, and that our response must be organized as well. Sure, comrades.
If nobody else wants to give the last away, so I'll give 1, 2 at most, and then we're going to wrap up. Is that okay? Right?
My name is Selandi. I'm from Zimbabwe. I live in Tshisimani House. One of the best houses, I think, because they've accommodated me, and I'm living there as I'm at home. But as of the question of Operation Dudula, I think it's not something that is just coming from nowhere. I believe it's coming from the top, because the guy who was killed in Johannesburg is actually coming from my hometown. Now, when you look, he died because he didn't have papers. I'm here, I'm documented though, but if I tell you that I have children that are almost 13 years, I gave birth to them when I was here, but they are still today not, they have birth certificate, but I can't put them in my papers because of the system. The system is I go there, it's down, they have less staff, they cannot help. So you see, people get undocumented not because they choose not to, but it's because of the system that is not, the system doesn't care about foreigners actually. I'm not saying it cares about South Africans, because I see also they have issues about the Department of Home Affairs. But as for us, I believe no one cares about us. We are just like aliens, as they say, whether you're documented or not. Because for me to get a child on, just put on my papers, it's 13 years now. The child is still not have the papers. So for me, I think Dudula is not just coming from nowhere. It's the leaders that are doing it, so that a lot of people just decide to say, okay, we will go back home or wherever, but I've been here more than 25 years. So which home am I going to again? Because I've been here for, is that like a lifetime me being here? So I believe it's not easy on us leaving our own homes, coming here and staying here in a foreign land. We didn't come because we want to eat chips. We left home because of different problems, others were political, others were economic. But for us who came in those years, it was political actually. But we are put in just one basket to say they just come here to take jobs. When I came here, I never worked. I had my own business. I actually employed 3 South Africans, which I was creating work, but no one counts that. When it comes to the drug dealings, anyone who is committing crime must be dealt with, but not to say foreigners are bringing drugs. They cannot bring drugs when there are no locals that are involved in that. They work hand in hand with people of the land. So it's just it's a mix. It's not that all foreigners are here to destroy. All foreigners are here to fight what is here.
100%. Thank you very much for that. When we talk to foreigners, crime and all of those things, we're not talking the Europeans. We're excluding these Europeans and their crime and all of these things and how they can quickly maneuver the system and so forth, right? So we have to know that there was a last comrade there, and I'm going to give the floor to where's the comrade? At the back, yes.
My name is Adhikar. I think it's important to when we look at the economy, it's racially divided or racially integrated community. I think the inception of the history came one. I think whenever you go anywhere in the world, when there's heated conflict somewhere else, people run somewhere. We know recently there were wars happening in North Africa, and people moved to Europe, and they went to Europe, especially Francophone countries. They went to the colonizers' place, you know, and coming back into Africa, we're at the bottom, you know, of Africa. So if there's heated conflict happening elsewhere in Congo, we move further down to the south. So I think my brother spoke about other wars and whatever. So possibly it's by design that when there's heated wars in those places, you know there are raw materials there, and know they are benefiting Europe, and therefore the safest bread basket, you know, is South Africa. It's in infrastructure. So I think that's important to look at, number one. Then number two, on a continuous basis in Parliament, there's a platform where our politicians on an everyday basis speak about policies and they're able to give feedback. and these are parliamentary monitoring groups. There are papers there that they discuss. So few people, EFF is there, ANC is there, they discuss. And there are policies they are put in place which we are not aware. And we should respond to in 30 days, you know, and the whole 59 million people in South Africa don't respond. Maybe it's only 10,000 out of, you know, who are aware of that. So in Gauteng, 2020, in September, the Premier signed they signed, the Provincial Parliament of Gauteng signed what we call a Township Revitalizer Economic Act. So the act was specifically saying that any economic activities the first people would able to participate in that would be Gauteng, people from the township, because most of the economic activities are happening in the township. So that also excluded foreigners. It did not say black foreigners, it said all foreigners. And I followed that conversation and went to the corporate environment. There are spaces in the corporate where they talk about these issues. And some corporate businesses said it's a threat to our businesses, because it means that now we as whites are also would be, if you are a first generation white person, maybe with a citizen, it would be, the first preference is black people from Gauteng. So there was an issue there. So when we talk about system, or when we say how the system promotes this, we should be able to look where are the policies that support these things. Obviously, it's not a national policy, it's a provincial act. It focuses at a specific environment. So it's not different to policies and acts that were placed during apartheid. It's an apartheid form of some sort, because there were people who discussed it at some point in Gauteng and said that, okay, the wealth of Gauteng should remain here. So I think also it's important when we look at this stuff, when they happen, where is the sources? Because in Gauteng, they're exercising what's already in, that's gazetted and was signed in. And we know that the policies, some of the policies of apartheid, when you look at apartheid, were signed here in the Western Cape, and they took effect after maybe 15 to 10 years after a 1 year, during a struggle, and I'll end there for us to think about.
Okay, so just to wrap up comments, I think to do some historical perspective. Where does migration come from? Where it started and so forth. And how apartheid has further entrenched it, and how migration, we've always had migration in terms of work, be it in the mines, on the farms, in whatever industry, there's always been that because of our interlinked economies in the SADC region and so forth. Comrade Brian, we've also looked at the stats of unemployment, 46% unemployment, 4 to 7%, Comrade Brian and the others, Comrade Zion, and brought that in, 4 to 7% of our brothers and sisters up in Africa are employed here. The majority of them are in self-employment in small micro businesses. Comrade Faisal also said that we need to be aware of the political economy that we find ourselves in as the background of that. Then we've also had Comrade Lumumba, Isaiah, and so forth, that spoke to the policies and the challenges and experiences of people underground when it comes to documentation, and we brought documentation specifically into it so that we in the room could understand. And then comrades came through from online, and here is that we also need to, we looked at documentation, we also have to look at our undocumented South Africans and places that we are having and how we deal with it, and that points to the inefficiencies of the state service delivery and how our government is failing us at almost every level. That, and we've also identified amongst ourselves here that be it Department of Social Services, Department of Health, Department of Home Affairs, SAPS as a whole, the state is failing us, and these issues and problems is not a foreign national issue. It is an issue of the state failing us, and we won't be fooled as a people here. We know who the enemy is, and we know that they are trying to divide the working class away from what the real enemy is, and that real enemy is capitalism in its whole. We also say that we need to be alert of what it is that people's agendas are. We see that there's a far right Trumpism coming up, and we witness that, whether it's through the patriarchal alliance, the Dudulas, the Cape exits, the Cape color, what you name it, there's a lot of it, and that is where we are moving. And as social movements and as progressive organizations, we should not be fooled by these people and they what they're trying to do. So what we're also saying is that these people are starting to organize themselves, and we as progressive formations also need to properly understand, educate ourselves, and mobilize amongst ourselves so that our cause is not being hijacked by some fluffy whatever sweeping up using the working class for their own means and so forth. I thank every comrade for being here tonight, for your time, and for your discussion. And surely this tonight shows that there's a need for us as progressive organizations to come together to talk to social equality in all forms of our struggles. Thank you so much, comrades.